yet, though. For now, American liberals are still living in that strange, irony-free world where it's possible to denounce racism even as you commit it. That's the same world Al Gore occupies when he flies private jets to global warming conferences. It's the place where attorneys general can yell at you about domestic violence even as they beat up their girlfriends. It's hypocrisy land. It's where liberals live. Last night, for example, MSNBC held a town hall meeting dedicated to fighting racism. Guess who they invited to lecture America on the topic? You guessed it, racists. The special was literally co-hosted by Al Sharpton. Remember him? He's the guy who ridiculed Jews in New York as, quote, diamond dealers. He's the one who denounced a Jewish store owner as a white interloper. That instigated a racial massacre in which 8 people were murdered. Also on stage last night was a guy called Tim Wise. Wise describes himself as a professional anti-racism activist, which ought to be a tip-off that he himself is a racist, which obviously he is. Here's Wise using MSNBC's platform to make ugly generalizations based on skin color. Watch this.
White America has been raised to believe, A, the police are always the good guys, and frankly, that black lives matter less than white comfort. What you are saying is my discomfort with you right now is worth more than the potential that your life could be snuffed in 10 minutes.
Wait, isn't that slander against an entire racial category? Oh, yes, it is. But let's say you want an even more nasty racial stereotyping. MSNBC is the channel for you. They've got it. Here's Tim Wise again. Keep in mind, this is what liberals are now claiming is the opposite of racism.
The gentrifiers of today, their parents or their grandparents ran away from the city to get away from black and brown folk. And now their children and their grandchildren are saying, oh, the suburbs, there's only so many Olive Gardens I can go to, so I need to go back to the city and get my life in the city. But when I do that, I need to have my hot yoga studio and my pottery studio and my stuff represented. And if you intrude on that, I will then call the police.
Are you taking notes on this? Are you getting this? They're telling you on MSNBC that because certain people have the same skin color, they all have the same dumb attitudes. They like the same crappy restaurants. They spend their free time pursuing the same frivolous hobbies. And by the way, they are all, every one of them, immoral. You can tell by the way they look. That's the official position of the American left, the same people currently accusing you of racism. Christopher Harris is executive director of Unhyphenated America, and he joins us tonight. Mr. Harris, what do you make of that, watching that?
Tucker, there's a lot of things going on in the world right now that came to my mind. For example, what's happening in Venezuela. When Tim was talking about people trying to gentrify areas. Well, if you look in Venezuela right now, there are people fleeing a terrible geopolitical socioeconomic issue, and they're going to Trinidad.
Right.
So they have an influx in Trinidad of Venezuelans. And Trinidad is trying to implement rules to kind of push some of them out. Now, most people don't know there's a lot of black people in Venezuela. They don't all look like Hugo Chavez. In fact, South America got one of the largest percentages. Over 50% of the slaves who were taken from Africa were brought to South America, yes, places like Brazil and Venezuela and everything like that. And so here it is. You have people who are black who don't want other people who are black flooding into their country.
So maybe it's more an economic issue. And I think, by the way, there are fair questions to raise about radical demographic change. For sure, it upsets people, and I understand that. But to pretend that it's all about race and that one race is worse than another race, isn't that the definition of racism?
Absolutely. Tim Wise is going to be able to pay his rent this month because he's a racial pimp. That's what he is. I mean, that's what he does. Is he travels around the country, going to colleges, telling young white men and young white women that you are a racist and that you're a benefit of white privilege. And they go on and they tell their parents how terrible they are because a guy named Tim Wise came to my college and told me that I have white privilege. And essentially what Tim is doing is he's assuming a privilege that, quite frankly, I don't acknowledge that he has. I have zero sense of inferiority. And that's one of those things that someone like Tim wants me to believe. In fact,
you think he wants you to have a sense of inferiority?
Absolutely. And President Bush talked about it. He said it's the soft bigotry of low expectations.
Yes.
And that's what's happening around the world. It's what's happening in America, that they're constantly trying to tell young black men and young black women that you have no chance in America because of your pigmentation. But no one wants to talk about the fact that different demographics, all black people are not African Americans. My wife is actually, her parents are from Panama. Her parents came here legally with nothing. They were able to climb the socioeconomic ladder. Both of them attained their degrees. Both their daughters attained their degrees. But yet there are people who are, I guess someone would call me an African American. I don't answer to that term. I'm an American black person. Obviously, you can tell by my pigmentation I'm black. But there's lots of people, even in my extended family, who have not attained what some of my in-laws have attained, regardless of the color of their skin. But Tim Wise would have you to believe that simply because of the color of your skin, you can't be successful in America. And you know what? President Trump, God bless him, what he's doing with the economy right now, it's helping black people.
Where do you think a country winds up where the official position is that the races are different, some are more moral than others, and basically they should hate each other? I mean, that is the message that a lot of our elites are foisting on the rest of us. What does that do to the country?
It tears it apart. Quite frankly, they're agents of chaos is what they are. Is that they make their money, like Mr. Wise, by helping to tear people apart. With Unhyphenated America, when people ask me what is Unhyphenated America, I said, we are what we sound like. We're an organization that believes that America's best when it's unhyphenated, that if you believe in, if you embrace, if you promote the principles of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, then you're an American. And if there's no need for any prefix or suffix, you're just an American. And that's what needs to be preached and taught on our college campuses instead of having the Tim Wises and the Al Sharptons.
Liberals, when I was a kid, I'm 49, not that old. Liberals used to say what you're saying. They don't anymore. Thank you. That was really nice to hear from you.
Thank you, Tucker.
I appreciate it. Well, the media were in, of course, consensus agreement on who was responsible for Roseanne Barr's career-ending tweets. Watch.
We have a president who was elected after trafficking in barely cloaked racial animus. And so we're seeing a lot of other people who are in many ways mimicking this type of language.
This kind of stuff is a direct byproduct of how Donald Trump behaves, the things that he has said, the things that he does not condemn.
And we have to stop pretending that this president has nothing to do with it, that he's not emboldening racist and racism and giving them a platform and making it okay.
Richard Goodstein is the lawyer who advised both of Hillary Clinton's presidential campaigns. He joins us tonight. Richard, I don't begrudge any political party or its surrogates in the media, the opportunity to grab an advantage when you see one. But on the subject of the tweets, which no normal person would defend, they're awful. Why the impulse to immediately make it a partisan political issue when there's a human message in this conversation, which is don't attack people on the basis of their race? Right. Like, it's that simple. Why the impulse to make it partisan?
Well, certainly what Roseanne Barr did was pathetic, not just to say it, but then to blame it on ambient. And remember, she also said it was Memorial Day. I mean, and this is somebody who had said the exact same thing about Susan Rice, who had basically defended the whole Seth Rist. I mean,
whatever.
She's gone down one rabbit hole.
You don't need to convince me the tweet was bad. I'm there already.
Well, no, actually, there are people I suspect who actually are, kind of joining to her defense, right? Oh, this is somehow her First Amendment rights are being infringed.
I think, but I'm not making that. What I'm saying is, look, for most of my adult life, the senior Democrat in the United States Senate was a former Klan recruiter, okay? Robert Byrd. A lot of things named after Robert Byrd. I'm not even attacking Robert Byrd. He apologized. But, let's get a little proportion here. The outrage is selective. I'm not defending the Roseanne crap, but I also think when people are jumping up and down and being like, actually, Trump did this, it's purely political. Let's just be honest.
Yeah, so actually I think that people who don't subscribe to your view believe the following: that Donald Trump has given license to people by saying they're good Nazis, by mocking handicapped people, by basically, the list is
mocking
endless.
Handicapped
oh, sure. Remember he went like this about that New York Times reporter?
Was he mocking all handicapped people?
He was mocking that guy. That's pathetic. That may be the single most pathetic thing that he's done. And he talked about Mexicans being racist. Look, the list is on and on. The fact of the matter is, though, when Donald Trump does that, and people say, well, he won, so his staff can go, well, I can mimic people. I can make fun of John McCain who's dying. I can, that's the problem. Then people who are supporters think at his rallies, you've heard people who covered his rally said these people were lovely, and then the rally would start, and they would say the most anti-Semitic, anti-female.
So look, I've been on television for 20 years through Democrat and Republican administrations, and the volume and the nastiness, the hate mail I received remains pretty much constant. I didn't blame Obama for the attacks, the death threats I got 5 years. I mean, let's just be totally real here. It's not. Look, I understand you don't like Trump, but this is a much larger question, and part of the question is, Do people who are engaging in racism, like Al Sharpton, have the right to lecture the rest of us about racism? Do they? Is Al Sharpton the spokesman you want against racism?
No.
Really?
He's not.
Oh, okay.
I agree with you. But I do think that it is undeniable that the fact that Donald Trump spews what he did on the campaign trail and as president to talk about good Nazis is something that sends a signal like, I basically am drawing succor from these people. And it's why he tweets about every stupid thing under the sun. NFL players kneeling, and he can't bring himself to be critical.
What you're trying to do is draw me into like defending every dumb Trump tweet, which I have no interest in doing. I want to talk about the universal principles here, okay? So we're against racism, I hope. I certainly am. We do a lot of shows on it.
Of course.
Is it wrong to discriminate against people on the basis of their skin color?
Well, so that's a different. You're talking about affirmative action.
No, I'm actually talking about racism. Is it wrong to discriminate against people on the basis of their skin color? And if it's not, then why do we care what Roseanne said? But if it is, I understand why we're upset.
Right.
Because you shouldn't attack people on the basis of immutable characteristics.
Right.
Do you agree with that?
I think that Roseanne Barr and people like her who talk about black people as apes are wrong.
I agree with that completely. I think it's disgusting. But what's the principle? Is it wrong to discriminate against someone on the basis of his skin color, to hold him back, to penalize him on the basis of his skin? It's a really simple question. Can you answer it?
Of course, but
and again,
you're acting like somehow slavery didn't happen.
I'm not saying that.
Well, that's the intimation of what you're getting at. I understand.
Why would it? Please.
Because that's what you're getting at.
No, I'm not getting at that. I'm a very straightforward person. I say what I mean. And please don't attack me. I'm asking you about a principle.
Right.
Which is it wrong to hurt people, to hold them back, deny them things they would otherwise get because of their race? It's a really simple question, yes or no.
I agree that people should not be discriminated against.
Please answer the question.
I'm saying they should not be discriminated against their race, but we don't have a colorblind society. Eric Holder and other black cabinet officials have trouble hailing a taxi cab to go to certain areas of Northwest Washington.
By the way, I'm not denying that. I'm merely saying, is it wrong to practice racism against people? Oh, it is?
Yes.
So you would say it's totally wrong to say to a child, because of your skin color, we're holding you back. There's a massive lawsuit against Harvard right now by Asian students who have basically proven that Harvard didn't let them in because of their race.
Right.
Is that okay with you?
Jews used to be subjected to the exact same thing.
And it was wrong.
Right.
But liberals support it now.
Right.
So those people lecture me about racism. Are you joking?
The Harvard argument is that there's a certain virtue in diversity.
Oh, there's a virtue in discrimination.
Because in diversity, you call what you want.
No, I'm not. I'm calling it what it is.
Yeah.
Because we both agreed that penalizing people on the basis of their race is immoral. You agreed with that. And yet it's happening right now with the full support of liberals, the same ones who are lecturing the rest of us about racism.
Right.
It's too much. Do you understand?
And I'm saying there's a quilt involved, and discriminating against people on the basis of their skin color is wrong.
Let's stop it.
Basically,
How about that?
But people were held back for hundreds of years,
agree.
And to basically act like that didn't happen is wrong too.
But I'm not acting like it didn't happen.
I'm not saying you
I think it's the central sin of America.
Yeah.
I think it's our original sin. I think it's terrible. But I don't think that racism is okay, and liberals do.
Right.
And I just want to be clear, and I want our viewers to understand that is the official position of the Democratic Party, is that hurting people on the basis of their race is a-okay.
No. The official position of the Democratic Party is that we have to take cognizance of the fact that what happened for 200 years, and if we act like it didn't happen, and that somehow or other we reach a point in life that we just act like skin color doesn't matter, that is basically ignoring the obvious.
So the Chinese kid who arrived here 20 minutes ago suffers for that because of his race.
No question.
And that's okay with the Democrats. The
No.
same ones giving us lectures during their anti-racism summits.
Yeah. Yeah, as I said, I think what the Chinese students are arguing about at Harvard has merit, as it did for the Jews.
Right, but it's not a big deal because they're Chinese. So
no, not in the least. I'm with them. Yeah.
I hope so. I am. Thank you, Richard.
Good
to see you.
Sure.
We just found an amazing series of old blog posts that, as far as we can tell, have received basically no media attention. The person who wrote them looks in retrospect like a prophet calling for America First policies at least a decade before Donald Trump entered politics. In the days after Hurricane Katrina, for example, the blogger in question suggested that native-born Americans, not, quote, low-paid Mexican workers, ought to rebuild the city of New Orleans. In 2006, the blogger said this about her television viewing habits, quote, I love Lou Dobbs. His show has become required viewing around my house. The blogger largely agreed with Lou Dobbs on immigration. Quote, flying the Mexican flag on U.S. soil strikes me as incredibly presumptuous and insulting to the U.S. The blogger went on to argue that illegal immigrants to this country are not coming here because they embrace our ideals. They're coming for money, which they then send back to Mexico. and she made a pretty clear-headed, evidence-based case for that. In a 2005 post, the same blogger attacked Democrat Howard Dean for using racist, anti-white rhetoric in a speech. Quote, tagging the other side, the Republicans, as the party of whitey may sound just like the way to get these minority voters back, but it so misses the point. The blogger later scolded Howard Dean for insulting Christians and white Americans. Who wrote all that? We could give you time to guess, but you'd never guess. Believe it or not, it seems like the author of what I just read was Joy Reid, the now totally dogmatic, race-baiting MSNBC weekend host. According to the Internet Archive, Joy Reid apparently posted those views on her now-defunct blog more than a decade ago. She wouldn't do that now. MSNBC would fire her right away for the crime of independent thinking. We repeatedly contacted Joy Reid's lawyer and MSNBC Today for comment, and no one responded to us. It's possible that Reid will claim those posts were written by a mysterious hacker. She's claimed that before, the last time she got caught with embarrassing blog posts. Maybe she'll blame the entire thing on Vladimir Putin himself or some nameless Macedonian agent. Or maybe she'll do the unexpected and admit that there was a time, before the revolution currently in progress, when she was actually kind of smart and reasonable. We await her explanation. Billionaire George Soros says Europe's path to survival is open borders and higher debt level. Nigel Farage weighs in on that idea next. Progressivism, not just in this country but around the world, is increasingly coming to resemble not just a religion, but a cult bent on suicide. Not overstating that. In Europe, billionaire George Soros recently said that European countries ought to cope with migrant crises, the ones that he helped encourage, by keeping their borders open to new arrivals and then taking on tens of billions of dollars in new debt, as if they don't have enough, to fund aid to developing countries. Meanwhile, in Oakland, California, the First Congregational Church is urging its members not to call the police ever, no matter what the problem is, for the stated purpose of protecting non-whites in the congregation from police violence. Nigel Farage once led the UK Independence Party, and he joins us now. Nigel, thanks for coming on. I wanted to ask you about this because you have an international perspective, and I don't think these trends are just American. I mean, I think these impulses are sort of shared by a lot of the people in charge of the world, the West.
Yeah.
And one of the driving impulses seems to be masochism or the desire to destroy our civilization, even suicidal in some cases. But the idea that you're not allowed to defend yourself seems to undergird a lot of what we're seeing. Have you noticed this?
Yes, not just yourself, but in fact the whole shape of society. I mean, George Soros' Open Society Foundation, which he, of course, has poured billions of dollars into. I mean, this is the biggest political campaigning organization in the world. He wants to break down the fundamental values of our society. And in the case of Europe, he doesn't want Europe to be based on Christianity. Now, all of this, whether it's Soros or some of those very strange people in California, all of this is based on some kind of self-loathing, some sort of guilt trip about the past. And in Soros's case, it's a guilt trip, of course, about America's, Germany's wartime actions, the way the Jews were treated. In America, in many cases, it's how the Native Indians were treated. It's all based on guilt, but it's not based on reality. I have to say, in the case of Soros, the bosses in Brussels will be furious with his timing. Right now, we have Italy in revolt because the new government, or the attempted new government, wants to get rid of 500,000 illegal migrants. And Soros appears to be going ever so slightly mad.
Right. I mean, look, I would say that there are a lot of sins that we collectively have committed as a society, as a civilization, obviously. But I sort of wonder, can we continue if those sins so shake our faith in ourselves that we refuse to defend ourselves? I mean, the church in Oakland that we described in the intro is encouraging its members not to call police even when they feel they need the police. I mean, if that's not a suicidal impulse, what is it?
Oh, no, I mean, look, there are many European cities now where the total failure of our political class to defend our Judeo-Christian culture, which actually underpins our whole society, is in many ways what's opened the doors to Islamic extremism. So we are engaged in some very, very dangerous policies here. The good news, though, is that voters are rebelling. Brexit, Trump, the recent Italian elections, the victory of Viktor Orban in Hungary, whatever these people say, ordinary people, real people, those that pay their taxes, obey the law and go to work, work. They want none of this.
I wonder why the Eastern Europeans don't seem quite as guilty as the West. Is it because they suffered for so long under the Soviets?
Oh, look, they suffered in many cases under Nazism and, of course, under the Soviets. You know,
right.
It's not until 1990, Tucker, that these countries were actually free Western democracies. And they do. I think it's important to realise that the church plays a much bigger role in society in Poland and Hungary than it does in France and Germany.
That's really smart. Nigel Farage, thank you. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Alan Dershowitz, one of the smartest and most distinguished men on the left, but he's being exiled for refusing to abandon civil liberties for political expedience. He tells his story next. Increasingly, though, he doesn't seem to have much of a home left on the left because he refuses to participate in dogmatic attacks on the president. Dershowitz has sharply criticized the Mueller investigation, for instance. He says that anti-Trump hostility is justifying attacks on civil liberties that threaten all of us. For saying that, he says his liberal friends don't invite him to dinner parties anymore, and some bark at him. Professor Dershowitz joins us tonight. Professor, thanks for coming on. I was struck by this story, your account of this, because you've taken unpopular, really unpopular positions, some that I disagree with over the years, and you haven't had this problem.
No.
Why? What's the difference?
Well, it's Trump. Trump changes everything. Just yesterday, on Martha's Vineyard, there was a dinner party to which I was not, my wife and I were not invited, but apparently I was the subject of the entire conversation. People asking, what's happened to Dershowitz? Why is he turned to the right? And I wish I had been there, because I would have pointed my finger at my liberal friends and said, it's all your fault. If you had worked as hard for the election of Hillary Clinton as I did, and if she had been elected and they were trying to impeach or charge her, I'd be saying exactly the same things in defense of her rights, as I did in defense of the rights of Bill Clinton and also in the defense of the rights of Richard Nixon going back to the 1970s.
Well, I
haven't
that.
changed. I have not changed. They have.
So just as a reference point, you were involved in the defense for a little while anyway of O.J. Simpson, who I think is credibly accused of murdering 2 people with a knife. When you went to Martha's Vineyard during those years, 95, 96, did people attack you at dinner parties for that?
A little bit, but not as much as this. It's never been like this. And this time, you know, it includes some of my relatives. As I said, the only thing that hurts me is that up until now, people who are my relatives would tell me, oh, people come over to you and say, you're related to Alan Dershowitz. Wow. Now they say, you're related to Alan Dershowitz? How can you justify what he's been saying about Donald Trump? So it affects my relatives, and that hurts me. I have a thick skin. I've been doing this for years. I've developed the thickest skin imaginable. By the way, a lot of the tweets, then I get hundreds of tweets and messages, a lot of them not only focus on what I've been saying about the constitutional rights of Donald Trump, but they relate it to me being pro-Israel and Jewish and make an anti-Semitic thing out of it as well. And so, you know, there's not only too much anti-Semitism on the right, there's quite a bit of it on the anti-Trump left as well. I'm feeling it.
I've noticed that. So, I mean, you've been at this for, I don't know, wouldn't even want to guess, half a century, an awfully long time, at the kind of forefront of the civil libertarian left. Has that group shrunk? I mean, is it not just Trump, but maybe the left is less interested in traditional civil liberties than it used to be?
Shrunk. There are no civil libertarians left on the left, certainly not the American Civil Liberties Union. They were the ones who said that the raid on Cohen's office, taking his lawyer-client files, was a good thing, not even suggesting what I suggested and what was ultimately adopted by the judge, to have a judicial monitor going through all of these emails. The ACLU is dead in the water when it comes to defending the civil liberties of people who they don't agree with, and that's just awful. There are still some civil libertarians left, but you can count them on one hand. Everybody has to pass the shoe on the other foot test. If the shoe were on the other foot, would you be taking the same position you're taking today? I passed that test. There are some others who passed that test, but too many, both on the right and on the left, don't pass the test. If Hillary Clinton had been elected, a lot of the people who are supporting me and defending me on the right would be attacking me for criticizing the prosecution or the impeachment of Hillary Clinton. We need neutral principles. We need standards of constitutionality that are apolitical, and I refuse to allow partisan politics to preempt my views on the Constitution, which I have stayed the same for 50 years.
Amen. When the FBI broke into the Gmail account of that creepy Governor Elliot Spitzer, I defended that creepy Governor Elliot Spitzer.
He's my friend.
I know, but I don't like him.
But research assistant, I like Elliot.
But it was totally wrong what they did to him, and it's important to say so. Professor, thank you. Great to see you.
Likewise.
Well, American companies tend to be progressive and defiant in the United States, but when it comes to dealing with China's autocrats, they are meek and submissive, amazingly so. The latest installment of our series on China is after the break. Our elites are always telling you how progressive they are. They tout their commitment to diversity. They fret about global warming. They're up for any new bathroom rule you can think of as long as it sounds modern. They're classic cool moms, basically, eager to show off their open minds. But their liberalism ends at the water's edge. When it comes to China, our greatest rival, American elites bow deeply to the elderly fascists who run that country. When the Chinese say jump, our ruling class has only one question: how high? Consider Gap, the proudly liberal clothing outfit. This spring, Gap pulled a T-shirt from all of its stores worldwide because that shirt featured an outline of China. The image did not include Taiwan or an obscure group of disputed islands in the South China Sea, and Beijing complained about that. Gap immediately destroyed the T-shirts. Then the company issued a groveling press release. Quote, Gap Inc. respects the sovereignty and territorial integrity of China. We failed to reflect the correct map of China. In other words, I'm sorry for being naughty, most honorable sir. Gap promised it would never happen again. That's just one of many examples. In January, Marriott apologized for listing Tibet, Taiwan, and Hong Kong and Macau as separate countries on an email questionnaire. Then Marriott fired an employee who liked to tweet about it. Marriott's obsequious apology to China's dictator says it all. Quote, some associates did not understand or take seriously enough the sovereignty and territorial integrity of China. Clearly written by the Chinese. Offending China is now a fireable offense in this country. American Express, Citibank, Goldman Sachs, they all agree. Those companies have all changed online content to eliminate suggestions that Taiwan and China are separate countries, even though, of course, they are separate countries. The Chinese insist American companies lie about that, and so they do. Hollywood's been doing it for years. The movie studios have been obedient to China's rulers probably for more than a decade. Ask Richard Gere. The actor, he says now he has trouble getting work because his views on Tibet offend Chinese officials. In 2016, the movie Doctor Strange, producers cast a white woman in the role of a Tibetan character. Why'd they do that? Doesn't sound like the diversity doctrine at work. It's not, but they did it anyway. Why? Well, the screenwriter explained that casting an ethnic Tibetan would make China mad, so they couldn't. In 2012, a remake of Red Dawn changed the bad guy from China to North Korea. Why? You know, because they didn't want to offend Beijing. How eager are American elites to do the bidding of their Chinese masters? Ask yourself this. Whatever happened to the Dalai Lama? Remember him? He used to be a hero to Americans, especially American liberals. They loved him. You almost never hear his name anymore. It turns out the Chinese government doesn't like him for his human rights activism. So under pressure from the Chinese government, his appearances by the Dalai Lama have been canceled around the world, including, shamefully, in this country. The Dalai Lama may be a great moral leader, but China pays the bills. Frank Wolf is a rare former member of Congress who has been sounding the alarm on China for a very long time, and he joins us now. Congressman, I'm grateful to have you. You really are one of the very few former members of Congress who is pointing out the human rights abuses in China and is willing to say what is true, which is they're bullying us. Why is that? Why aren't more saying it?
Well, I don't know, Tucker, but you're right. I mean, 142 Tibetan monks and nuns poured kerosene on their bodies, set themselves aflame. There are Uyghur Muslim children, thousands being taken away to detention camps. Catholic bishops
right now?
Right now.
Muslims are being rounded up in China.
Thousands. Many thousands in detention camps, almost like Stalinist camps. And Catholic bishops missing, 2 Catholic. Chris Smith took Holy Communion from Bishop Sue. He's never been seen again. Protestant pastors are being arrested. I mean, it is as bad today as it's ever been since Mao. And you're exactly right. I mean, Richard Gere will never make another movie. AMC has been sold to the Chinese. Other studios have been sold, and they censor you, and then they censor you. They say, if you run that, Richard Gere will never be in a major movie.
So without naming names, because this is a very small city, and you've been here for a long time, but looking out across the city, you know a lot of lobbyists, a lot of them served in Congress. What percentage would you say are on the payroll in some way with China?
Well, I'll say some names. I mean, one of the bigger firms in town, Squires, Patton Boggs, they represent the Chinese government. They also represent Bashir, the indicted war criminal from Sudan who's been indicted for genocide. So Squires, Patton Boggs, they represent them.
So would you say that many different lobbying outfits, PR firms in Washington in some way take money from the Chinese interests?
Yes, they do. What's just interesting, during the 80s when I got elected, when Ronald Reagan was here, no company, no PR firm, no law firm would have ever represented the Soviet Union. And now so many are representing China. I mean, for Squires, Patton Boggs to represent Bashir, the president of Sudan, who is an indicted war criminal for genocide, what took place in Darfur. So the standards in this town have totally changed.
Do you think that that may be connected to the fact that you hear a lot about Russia, but you never hear anything about China's human rights abuses? Do you think they're connected?
The human rights abuses and lack of religious freedom is worse today in China than it's been since the days of Mao. And don't forget, President Xi has now appointed himself president for life. It is terrible. That's why I can't understand the very fact that thousands of Muslim kids are being taken away. I had a Muslim woman come by my office about 2 months ago. 35 of her grandchildren have been taken and put in these detention camps. I urge you to Google when this show's over.
I'm going to. We're doing, you just
shocking.
Convinced me. Next week, we're going to do a segment on Chinese human rights abuses, and you would think that American liberals would care, but they don't. But you do, and I appreciate it. Congressman, thank you for coming on.
Thank you, Tucker.
Great to see you.
Thank you.
British authorities arrested Tommy Robinson for trying to cover sexual abuse in Great Britain, and they covered up their arrest of him. That's not the first time it has happened in Great Britain, sadly. Katie Hopkins here with an update next. Rights, the freedom of religion, the freedom of speech, freedom of the press, all of those have their roots in Great Britain, but in Britain itself, those rights are dying out. Tommy Robinson is a journalist and a political activist there. One of Robinson's chief causes is raising awareness about sexual abuse, grooming, and rape committed in his country by immigrants, mostly from the Islamic world. Those crimes are ones that local authorities have ignored in order to avoid being called bigoted. Last year, Robinson attempted to cover a gang rape trial involving several Muslim men in Canterbury. For that, he was arrested, given a suspended jail sentence, and told not to cover any further trials. Undeterred, this past weekend, he performed a live stream outside a sexual abuse grooming trial in Leeds. In a free country, of course, anybody ought to be able to say what they think on a public street, but Britain is not a free country anymore. So in a matter of hours, Robinson was arrested, tried and convicted, and sentenced to 13 months in jail. That was fine, by the way, with most members of the press there and here. The judge further barred the British media from even reporting on Robinson's imprisonment, too. That ban was only lifted yesterday, 4 days after he went behind bars. And that, too, was fine with most journalists in Great Britain. And here, they said virtually nothing about it, amazingly. Katie Hopkins is a columnist with the Rebel Media. We talked to her about this earlier. Katie, am I misstating this? I mean, it sounds, and I know the pretext for this is that he was interfering with jurors, but he was speaking his views on a public street when he was arrested and convicted immediately and sentenced to over a year in prison. Am I mischaracterizing that?
You're not at all. That's exactly what happened. He was outside the court. He was reporting on the trial of a grooming gang, as I would call it, a rape squad. It's a cause, as you rightly say, that he's believed in for so many years. And he's one of those people who's been calling this out relentlessly, despite all of the slurs that are made against him. And yet, within 5 hours, he was arrested, he was tried, and he was sent to prison for 13 months, and none of us were allowed to talk about it, write about it, mention it, because there was also a ban on any of the media speaking about it.
Well, that's the part I don't understand.
These are very dark times in the UK. It's a very curious feeling in this country at the moment, and I would say the country is on a knife edge. There is a real sense now that we are against our own government, that the establishment is working against us, and in order to cleanse voices it doesn't like, it will put them inside for as long as it needs to shut them up.
That's horrifying. I don't know, I'll be honest, anything really about Tommy Robinson. I don't care. I don't know what he believed. It doesn't matter. He was saying what he thinks in public.
Take that, Tucker. I don't know Tommy either. I'm not a colleague of his. I don't work with him. Many people say he's an idiot, and in some ways I concur.
So what?
He's been told not to report at these trials, and yet he's still there reporting. He didn't go with his lawyer or solicitor. You know, he knew he was going to get into trouble. But then I say to myself, even if you don't like the guy, even if you don't know the guy, surely there's some fundamental principles like,
yes,
where was the swift justice for the victims of the grooming gangs? Where was the swift justice for the 11-year-old that was raped? If we can get Tommy in prison within 5 hours, where was the swift justice for these men? And where was the swift justice for the victims? And I would also say, no matter what you think of Tommy, whether you hate him, love him, don't know him, throwing him in prison when he is a guy who's repeatedly called out majority Pakistani grooming gangs, rape squads, that is a death sentence for Tommy Robinson. And we may criticize, our government may criticize the Russians, like for getting rid of Skripal and other spies they no longer want in our country. But our government knows if they put Tommy Robinson inside as they have done, and if he's put on an open wing, he will not survive his time inside. So I don't see how we're any different from the Russians if this is how we're going to cleanse people that speak out against the establishment. These are dark times.
Where
for the
are the
UK,
media? Where are the media in this? I mean, so again, you don't have to like this guy or know anything about him to understand what's at stake here, which is freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom of the press. Why would media outlets in Great Britain go along with this gag order? Why didn't they just defy it? Go ahead and arrest us all. If this isn't a civil rights issue, then what is a civil rights issue?
Well, this is where we divide, Tucker, into right and wrong, good and bad. And I have to say, I feel like majority of mainstream media right now in the UK is on the side of the bad. It is more important for them to be seen as multicultural and accepting and welcoming to our Muslim colleagues and our friends than it is to stand up for what we know is right. So it suits them much better to say, well, no, Tommy Robinson is an idiot. He was told not to be there at the court. He was still there at the court. And the law is in every sense justified to throw him inside. And they're celebrating, just as they're celebrating with Roseanne. But actually, what we have to ask ourselves is, what happened to freedom of speech in the UK? Because I firmly believe, and it's my opinion, we no longer have freedom of speech in the UK. And I believe Tommy Robinson will be killed in